Graham Norton, the charming master of television who can turn almost any interview into a viral moment, once admitted that over his 4-decade career, there were 6 guests he simply could not tolerate. While most stars brought wit and warmth to his iconic red chair, a few crossed the line, arriving with alcohol in hand, climbing onto his lap as though the chair were merely a stepping stool, and behaving in ways that made the studio visibly uncomfortable. Some even went further, making crude remarks or inappropriate gestures toward women and co-stars, all under the unforgiving glare of the cameras. So who were the celebrities who truly rattled Graham's composure, pushing even his legendary humor to its limits? Let's explore the 6 names said to appear on Graham Norton's blacklist. Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke's reputation for raw talent has long been matched by an equally notorious history of addiction, erratic behavior, and crude remarks about women. By the time he appeared on The Graham Norton Show in 2008 to promote the wrestler, many in the industry already knew that an interview with Rourke could go in any direction, and not always a pleasant one. What unfolded that night, however, would go down as one of the most uncomfortable moments in Graham Norton's long hosting career. Rourke was seated alongside Jessica Biel and Martha Wright, a lineup that should have balanced the energy of the sofa. Instead, the atmosphere was tense almost before the cameras began rolling. In a 2025 interview with The Independent, Graham Norton recalled watching Rourke arrive at the studio clutching a bottle of Jack Daniels that was nearly half empty. "I knew right then it was going to be a nightmare," Graham admitted, because Mickey wasn't just drunk, he was already completely in his own world. Treating the show like his personal stage. Once seated on the iconic red sofa, Rourke immediately began treating the show less like a televised interview and more like his personal stage. Despite clear studio rules, he repeatedly lit cigarettes, forcing staff and host alike to intervene. Every time Graham turned his attention to another guest, Rourke would spark up again, as if daring anyone to stop him. Norton later likened the experience to supervising a child rather than conversing with a seasoned Hollywood actor. More troubling were Rourke's overly familiar and inappropriate remarks toward Jessica Biel. His comments were delivered with a casual crudity that left Biel visibly uncomfortable, her polite smile masking the tension beneath. Graham repeatedly stepped in, redirecting the conversation and apologizing on air in an effort to calm the atmosphere. "I felt like a teacher in a chaotic classroom," Norton recalled, trying to maintain order while keeping the show moving forward. It felt closer to a century. The interview dragged on for 45 excruciating minutes, though Norton later said it felt closer to a century. Rourke oscillated between laughing loudly at his own jokes, rambling incoherently about boxing in Hollywood, and then suddenly falling silent, creating long, awkward pauses that sucked the energy out of the room. These dead moments forced Graham to work overtime, jumping in with forced humor and follow-up questions just to keep the conversation afloat. Rourke's vague, half-formed answers made it nearly impossible to build a natural rhythm. Norton often had to ask multiple questions just to extract a single coherent sentence, stretching already uncomfortable silences even further. Meanwhile, Rourke's body language spoke volumes, leaning back in his chair, avoiding eye contact, and appearing largely indifferent to both the host and his fellow guests. The warmth and spontaneity that normally defined the Graham Norton Show were completely drained from the studio. A test of endurance. Behind the scenes, the strain was just as evident. A producer later summed it up bluntly. It was like talking to a wall. Even with decades of experience, Norton found himself unable to steer the interview toward anything memorable or engaging. Instead of playful banter and shared laughter, the episode became a test of endurance, with Graham carrying nearly the entire conversation while Rourke offered little in return. When the episode finally aired, viewers could clearly see the fatigue etched across Norton's face. His usual sparkle was dulled, replaced by the look of someone simply trying to get through the night. Graham later admitted it was one of the hardest interviews of his career, not because of open hostility or outright disrespect, but because of the complete lack of connection. There was no rhythm, no mutual understanding, no shared willingness to play along. A cautionary tale. In the end, what should have been a triumphant promotional appearance for the wrestler instead became a cautionary tale about how easily a television interview can unravel. The episode proved that even the most skilled and charismatic host can be pushed to their limits, not by open controversy or dramatic confrontation, but by sheer disengagement, unpredictability, and a refusal to meet the moment with professionalism. For Graham Norton, the experience with Mickey Rourke was unforgettable, not because it sparked laughter or viral moments, but because it drained the energy from the room and demanded constant damage control. Every smile was forced, every segue carefully calculated, and every minute felt heavier than the last. Yet despite how uncomfortable and taxing that interview was, it still failed to claim the top spot on Norton's list of worst experiences. Another guest would soon surpass it, delivering behavior so unexpected and unsettling that it left even Graham Norton, usually unflappable, momentarily stunned, the audience in disbelief. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein's appearance on The Graham Norton Show stands as one of the most unsettling moments in the program's long history, not because of overt scandal at the time, but because of the sheer weight of arrogance he brought with him. Long before his public downfall, Weinstein was already infamous behind the scenes for his obsession with control and self-importance. Yet in 2015, he was still regarded as a Hollywood kingmaker, a producer whose power could open doors or close them permanently. According to Graham Norton, the warning signs appeared even before Weinstein set foot in the studio. In a 2023 interview with RTE Radio 1, Graham recalled how Weinstein repeatedly pressured the show's production team to make room for him despite an already full guest list. Email after email arrived, demanding a seat on the iconic red sofa. "We didn't want to," Graham admitted candidly, but he insisted, and eventually he won. It was an early demonstration of a man accustomed to bending situations and people to his will. It was meant to promote the imitation game. Weinstein eventually appeared alongside the impressive lineup that included Olivia Colman, David Tennant, and Tom Holland, actors known for their warmth, humor, and generosity in group interviews. The episode was meant to promote the imitation game and other projects, but it quickly became clear that Weinstein had little interest in collaborative conversation. Rather than participating in the show's trademark lighthearted banter, he repeatedly hijacked the discussion, interrupting both Norton and the other guests to redirect attention back to himself. The rhythm of the show was disrupted. Every anecdote, no matter how small, became an opportunity for Weinstein to assert his influence, recount his achievements, or remind the audience of his importance. The rhythm of the show, normally effortless and playful, was repeatedly disrupted. Graham, a master of improvisation, found himself constantly steering the conversation back on track, gently cutting Weinstein off or shifting focus to the other guests to prevent the episode from collapsing into self-promotion. What troubled Graham most was not a lack of energy or enthusiasm, but Weinstein's complete disregard for boundaries. There was an unspoken assumption in his behavior that fame and power entitled him to dominate the space. He acted as though the red sofa belonged to him, treating the show not as a shared platform, but as an extension of his personal domain. The natural charm of the program was steadily eroded by his need for control. Deeply unsettling rather than dramatic. In later reflections, Graham described the experience as deeply unsettling rather than dramatic. Meeting Weinstein, he said, was proof that even with experience and improvisational skill, a host can face unpredictable challenges when confronting powerful, unmanageable personalities. The encounter served as a reminder that humor and charisma, while effective tools, are sometimes tested by people who do not play by the same social rules. At the time, the episode was merely remembered as awkward. Another difficult guest, another tense broadcast survived through professionalism and restraint. Yet years later, when the full extent of Weinstein's behavior was exposed to the world, the memory took on a far darker meaning. Looking back, Graham admitted, "I knew nothing back then, but with hindsight, the signs seemed clearer. The arrogance, the dominance, the inability to share space, all appeared as early glimpses of a deeply troubling personality. A chilling warning. The episode, once uncomfortable but forgettable, transformed into something else entirely. Chilling warning. It became an example of how abuse of power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives smiling, confident and persuasive, cloaked in prestige and success, steps onto a stage, assumes control, and dares anyone to challenge it. Following the rise of the Me Too movement, Graham Norton did not hesitate to speak openly about the experience. In a 2022 interview with the Irish Times, he bluntly described Weinstein as the worst person ever to sit on my sofa. His words were sharp, laced with both sarcasm and disgust. Referring to Weinstein's imprisonment, Graham added, "Now he's in jail, so the reward is his." Comment resonated strongly, reflecting both moral clarity and long-delayed accountability. Once a mild tension, now feels heavy and uncomfortable. Clips of the episode still exist online, though few viewers choose to revisit them. What once appeared as a mild tension now feels heavy and uncomfortable, colored by what the world has since learned. For Graham, the memory remains a stark reminder that evil does not always reveal itself immediately. It can be charming, persuasive, and outwardly successful. It doesn't shout, it interrupts. It doesn't threaten, it dominates. Harvey Weinstein's time on the red sofa ultimately became one of the most haunting entries on Graham Norton's blacklist, not because of chaos or drunken unpredictability, but because of calculated arrogance and entitlement. And while Weinstein may have been a storm of control and self-obsession, he was not the first to cast a long shadow over the show. Before him, there had been another guest, one whose reign was quieter, longer, and just as draining. Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro was once jokingly described by Graham Norton as a prime candidate for his most difficult guest, until Harvey Weinstein arrived and redefined discomfort altogether. Yet De Niro occupies a unique place on Norton's personal scale of challenge. If Weinstein represented domination and arrogance, De Niro symbolized something far quieter, but no less taxing: silence. For Graham, De Niro was not an antagonist nor a troublemaker, but the embodiment of an interviewer's greatest fear, a guest who simply gives you nothing to work with. Universally praised as one of the most talented and respected actors in Hollywood, Robert De Niro's screen presence is legendary. His performances are layered, intense, and unforgettable. Off-screen, however, his reputation for being difficult to interview is just as well known. Whenever De Niro's name came up backstage, Graham would reportedly sigh, as though recalling a date filled with promise that ended in long, awkward pauses. The anticipation was always there, but so was the dread. Made the host work for momentum. For Graham Norton, De Niro was never an enemy. Instead, he was the perfect example of a guest who forced the host to work relentlessly just to maintain momentum. A brilliant actor, yes, but decidedly not a conversational king. Where other guests bounced off the energy of the red sofa, De Niro sat calmly, offering little more than carefully chosen words, brief acknowledgments, or a polite nod. This contrast became especially evident during De Niro's appearances on The Graham Norton Show, most notably in 2018, when he joined the cast of Ocean's 8 alongside Helena Bonham Carter, Anne Hathaway, Rihanna, and Mindy Kaling. On paper, it was a dream lineup, bursting with personality and star power. Practice, it was chaotic in an entirely different way. Quiet, composed, and largely detached. Reflecting on the episode during a Cheltenham Literature Festival appearance, Graham famously joked, "I felt like a bus driver at a bachelor party." For 45 minutes, everyone spoke at once, laughing loudly and competing for airtime, while the audience struggled to follow what was happening. In the middle of the whirlwind sat De Niro, quiet, composed, and largely detached from the frenzy around him. Norton quickly realized that De Niro's responses were minimal and cautious. Questions that might have sparked long anecdotes from other guests were met with a few words, a measured smile, or silence. The show's usual fast-paced rhythm slowed dramatically. Graham found himself carefully drawing out conversation with gentle humor and persistent follow-ups, attempting to bridge the gap between De Niro's reserved demeanor and the show's naturally lively tone. A combination of dead silence and occasional rambling. What frustrated Graham most was not rudeness or arrogance, because De Niro was neither, but the peculiar combination of dead silence and occasional rambling. It was, as Graham once described, like watching a 2-hour art film without a climax. The energy never quite peaked, and the momentum never fully arrived. In a Sunday Express interview in September 2024, Graham bluntly labeled De Niro as boring, placing him alongside those guests whose silence drained the vitality from the show. De Niro is not a conversation king, he said, with a half-smile that suggested both respect and resignation. This mattered deeply to Graham, who's always valued spontaneity, warmth, and shared laughter. Being deprived of conversational chemistry, even by a cinematic legend, felt like trying to perform without music. Contrast became even sharper when De Niro's appearances were compared to guests like Bruce Springsteen or Julia Roberts, who turned the red sofa into something resembling a joyous house party. Against that backdrop, De Niro's calm, cautious presence felt almost immovable. Only honest frustration. Yet Norton never framed De Niro as a villain. There was no bitterness, only honest frustration. "It's hard, Robert," Graham once joked on air, a remark delivered with affection rather than criticism. The moment highlighted a truth even seasoned broadcasters face. Not every personality fits the same format. Even the best hosts must adapt or struggle when confronted with guests who exist on a completely different wavelength. Ironically, it was this very restraint that offered viewers a different kind of insight. While the energy in the room was undeniably muted, De Niro's thoughtful pauses, subtle smiles, and measured words revealed a man deeply private and introspective. Small moments, a quiet nod, a rare laugh, carried more weight precisely because they were so rare. In its own subdued way, the interview became memorable. Sometimes the hardest guests to reach leave the deepest impressions. De Niro's appearances reminded audiences that charisma does not always roar, sometimes it whispers. And while Graham Norton may have found the experience draining, it underscored the unpredictable nature of live television, where brilliance and boredom can sit side by side on the same red sofa. But the discomfort didn't end there. If Robert De Niro left viewers feeling subdued, the next guest would provoke something far stronger. This time Graham wouldn't just struggle, he would loathe the experience with unmistakable bitterness. Mark Wahlberg. Mark Wahlberg's appearances on The Graham Norton Show remain among the most talked about examples of how charm, confidence, and chaos can collide on live television. Known for his bold personality and high-energy presence, Wahlberg has never been a shy guest, yet one particular episode in 2013 crossed the line from lively unpredictability into outright discomfort, leaving an impression that Graham Norton and many viewers would not soon forget. That 2013 episode promised a perfect balance. Michael Fassbender arrived sharp, composed, and effortlessly professional. Sarah Silverman brought her trademark quick wit, primed to ignite sharp humor and fearless banter. Mark Wahlberg rounded out the lineup, expected to add charismatic star power and playful bravado. On paper, it was an ideal mix, one that should have delivered a memorable night of laughter and ease. The mood shifted when he stepped on stage. However, the mood shifted the moment Wahlberg stepped onto the stage. His posture was overly confident, his movements slightly exaggerated, and his speech carried the unmistakable hint of slur. At first, the audience laughed, assuming he was simply riding a wave of excitement. Early jokes landed loudly, perhaps too loudly, and Wahlberg's exuberance dominated the room. But as the minutes passed, the energy grew restless rather than infectious. Wahlberg's jokes veered off track, stretching punchlines too far and interrupting the natural flow of conversation. What initially felt spontaneous soon became awkward. Studio atmosphere tightened, and nervous laughter replaced genuine amusement. Graham Norton, ever the professional, smiled through the discomfort while subtly attempting to regain control of the conversation. Still, it was becoming clear that Wahlberg was operating on a different frequency than everyone else on the sofa. the moment which defined the episode. Then came the moment that would define the episode. Without warning, Wahlberg stood up, noticeably unsteady, and climbed onto Graham Norton's lap. Draping an arm around the host's shoulder, he laughed as though the two were longtime friends sharing a private joke. Studio erupted into uneasy laughter. Some audience members gasped, others looked away unsure whether to laugh or cringe. Graham maintained his composure, smiling and gently attempting to restore order, but his eyes betrayed a flash of tension. Later reflecting on the incident, Norton admitted he felt the situation slipping out of his control. He was just losing it, Graham said. I mean, really losing it. Home viewers were equally stunned. Social media quickly filled with reactions, split between those who saw the moment as unpredictable comedy and those who experienced intense secondhand embarrassment. It was a stark reminder that even seasoned hosts cannot anticipate every twist live television can take. He simply got carried away. Wahlberg later acknowledged that he had consumed a few drinks before the show and simply got carried away. While his intentions may not have been malicious, the incident crossed an unspoken boundary. What was meant to be playful familiarity became an uncomfortable display that disrupted the show's balance. The episode entered the Graham Norton Show archive as a cautionary tale, proof that live television, while thrilling, can quickly veer into chaos. 3 years later, in 2017, Wahlberg returned to the red sofa under very different circumstances. Promoting Transformers, he appeared alongside Tom Holland and Anthony Hopkins. This time, he was sober, controlled, and far more measured in his behavior. The night proceeded smoothly, until Wahlberg couldn't resist one more provocative moment. Norton smoothly steered the conversation away. Turning to the young Tom Holland, he quipped, "You never been to jail, huh?" The remark landed sharply. The audience immediately understood the reference to Wahlberg's own criminal past in 1988, a chapter he has occasionally alluded to in an attempt to project toughness. In a brief moment, the studio froze. Graham Norton paused, registering the awkwardness, before smoothly steering the conversation away with a half-smile and a deftly timed remark that transformed the tension into subtle satire. The audience giggled, the moment diffused. Wahlberg himself blushed, clearly realizing he had misjudged the tone. Graham didn't appear to hate him for it, but the discomfort was unmistakable. The comment created a forced atmosphere, one Norton had to skillfully dismantle in real time. With just a few words, Graham restored balance, showcasing once again why he remains one of the most adept hosts in television. The double-edged nature of celebrity charisma. In hindsight, Wahlberg's appearances reflect the double-edged nature of celebrity charisma. His clumsy antics were not rooted in malice, but in excess. Too much confidence, too much bravado, and a misplaced sense of familiarity. They highlighted how easily boundaries can blur when fame meets live broadcasting. What do you think of Mark Wahlberg's unpredictable moments? Harmless fun or uncomfortable missteps? Either way, his time on the red sofa remains unforgettable. And yet, as awkward as Wahlberg's antics were, they pale in comparison to the discomfort brought by the next guest, a figure whose presence left Graham Norton not amused but deeply unsettled. Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner represented a very different kind of challenge on The Graham Norton Show. Unlike guests who brought chaos, arrogance, or boundary-crossing behavior, Costner's difficulty stemmed from something far quieter, an almost immovable seriousness. His appearance did not erupt into controversy or viral moments, but instead unfolded as a slow, restrained exchange that left both the host and the audience yearning for spark. Graham Norton later recalled that from the very first moment Costner sat on the iconic red sofa, he radiated indifference. There was a sense that he would have preferred to be anywhere else, perhaps riding a horse across the open plains of Yellowstone, rather than participating in a lively, unscripted conversation. His posture was composed, his expressions measured, and his responses clipped. While other guests leaned forward, eager to engage, Costner remained emotionally distant. drawing Costner with his humor. Throughout the interview, Graham attempted to draw him in using humor, playful teasing, and open-ended questions. Other guests, especially Jeremy, whose natural sarcasm and warmth typically elevated the room, tried to bounce energy off him, offering anecdotes and light jabs designed to loosen the atmosphere. Yet Costner's demeanor barely shifted. He responded politely but without warmth, delivering short, cautious answers that rarely opened doors for follow-up conversation. This reserved attitude clashed sharply with the show's trademark rhythm. Graham Norton's show thrives on overlapping dialogue, spontaneous laughter, and a sense of shared mischief. Costner's seriousness disrupted that flow. Jokes landed, paused, and hovered in the air before finally receiving restrained acknowledgement. Moments that should have built momentum instead dissolved into silence. His composure created awkwardness. Importantly, Costner was never rude or disrespectful. There were no inappropriate remarks, no visible irritation, and no confrontations. And yet his cool composure created an unmistakable awkwardness. Graham later admitted that the frustration came from having to carry nearly the entire segment alone. With each brief response, Norton was forced to work harder, filling gaps, shifting topics, and injecting humor wherever possible to prevent the interview from stalling completely. Viewers could sense the strain. Graham's usual relaxed ease became slightly more deliberate, his transitions more carefully timed. Costner, meanwhile, appeared unmoved by the playful tone around him. When Norton shared humorous stories or exaggerated observations, Costner reacted with polite nods rather than laughter. Conversations that should have sparked itself felt stiff, leaving an uneven balance between entertainment and formality. Not a press conference, but designed to be silly. Norton later summed up the situation with characteristic honesty. Some people don't get this show. It's designed to be silly, not a press conference. The comment was not meant as an insult, but as an acknowledgement of mismatched expectations. Costner approached the interview as a professional obligation, measured, reserved, and controlled, while the show demanded spontaneity and shared vulnerability. The difference in pacing became increasingly noticeable. Every joke seemed to wait for Costner's response, creating pauses that felt longer than they actually were. When other guests shared funny anecdotes, Costner listened attentively but passively, as though watching a documentary rather than participating in a conversation. His reactions were respectful yet distant, lacking the rapport that makes group interviews feel alive. Heavier, slower, and less charming. Audience members noticed, while no single moment stood out as disastrous, the cumulative effect was undeniable. The episode felt heavier, slower, and less charming than usual. Norton later acknowledged that not every guest fits every format, and that this mismatch, while natural, can drain the energy from a show built on chemistry and quick exchanges. Despite the awkwardness, Costner's appearance offered its own kind of insight. It revealed a man deeply private, perhaps uncomfortable with unscripted humor, and more at ease in structured storytelling than spontaneous banter. In that sense, the interview was honest, if not entertaining. It reminded viewers that charisma on screen does not always translate to ease on a talk show sofa. For Graham Norton, however, the experience was undeniably frustrating. He thrives on shared energy, on guests willing to play along and embrace the absurdity of live television. Costner's reluctance to do so left Norton fighting against inertia rather than dancing with it. Still, as challenging as Costner's reserve was, it did not earn him the top spot on Norton's blacklist. That distinction belonged to someone else entirely, someone whose seriousness crossed into something far more aggravating. Daryl Hannah. One of the most difficult guests Graham Norton has ever hosted was Daryl Hannah, whose appearance became a uniquely uncomfortable chapter in the show's history. Unlike other challenging stars who created chaos through arrogance, drunkenness, or boundary-crossing behavior, Hannah presented an entirely different problem. She simply refused to engage. Her resistance was quiet, almost invisible, yet profoundly disruptive. turning what should have been a lively interview into one of the most painful experiences of Norton's career. From the outset, Hannah's answers were confined to curt phrases, often followed by long, heavy silences that seemed to stretch endlessly across the studio. Each pause chipped away at the rhythm of the show, leaving Graham scrambling to fill the void. In later recollections, Norton admitted that it often felt as though Hannah had been dragged onto the red sofa against her will, rather than appearing as a willing guest. Her body language was closed, her tone distant, and her presence disengaged, as if the entire experience held no appeal for her whatsoever. The silence did not stem from shyness. What made the situation particularly difficult was that Hannah's silence didn't stem from shyness or caution. Other reserved guests, well-measured, still offered something, an anecdote, a reaction, a spark of personality. Hannah, however, remained almost completely inaccessible. Questions designed to invite humor or reflection were met with minimal replies, and attempts to open up broader conversation failed repeatedly. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the interview progressed. Graham tried everything in his arsenal to draw her out. He used humor, gentle teasing, empathy, and even self-deprecation, techniques that had worked countless times with other reluctant guests. Yet none of it had any effect. The silence persisted, thick and uncomfortable, forcing Norton to drag the conversation forward as if with a rope, as he later described it. The audience could feel the strain, sensing that something was fundamentally off. Lack of participation. Unlike guests who challenge a host through confrontation or disrespect, Hannah's difficulty lay in her complete lack of participation. She was neither rude nor oppositional, which made the situation even more unsettling. There was nothing for Norton to push against, nothing to redirect, only absence. Her quiet energy drained the liveliness that defines The Graham Norton Show, transforming the interview into an exercise in endurance. Norton later described Hannah as one of the most silent guests ever to sit on the red sofa. The rare moments when she did respond offered no momentum, only brief acknowledgments that led back into silence. Each gap felt heavier than the last, and viewers at home could sense the discomfort radiating from the screen. In the end, the experience left Graham deeply unsettled, not because of anger or frustration, but because of a complete lack of connection. Hannah simply didn't feel comfortable in the show's humorous, lighthearted environment, and no amount of professionalism or charm could bridge that gap. Even as Graham maintained his smile and guided the program forward, the powerlessness of the moment was unmistakable, marking the interview as one of the most challenging of his career. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon,